I might tell a little bit about each kid that I remember, and I'm going to start with Gail. I raised a big garden, and I had a big tiller that I tilled the garden with, and I kept it at the house, but the garden was on the back end of our lot, but I had to go around the block to get to it. And so Gail would get up on my shoulders when she was about a year and a half old, maybe, and would ride my shoulders around to the garden, and then she'd ride there while I tilled the garden. And most of the time, after I'd tilled for a while, she'd lay her head down on my head and go to sleep. And while I was tilling that garden, and the neighbors just couldn't believe that a child could ride on my shoulders that way and sleep. So she got to be a kind of a novelty in the neighborhood for that. So she had a great time, but every time I'd get the tiller out, she'd want to go with me on my shoulders. So I took her a lot that way on tilling the garden. And then when we'd go out to weed it, she'd come along and help, and all the kids helped in the garden. That was part of our project as a family, was to irrigate and weed the garden. And we had the best looking garden in the valley because I had a bunch of helpers to help weed. And Lynn, I think of Lynn once, and I used to kind of tickle them and play with, so Lynn come up once and told me, let's play tickle. And so I'd go out and tickle her, and they just get excited and laugh and have a great time. So that was one of the things I remember on Lynn when she was just little, wanting to play tickle. I think of Lynn, as she grew up, was a real quiet child. She didn't make a lot of fuss over anything. Just the sweetest little gal you ever saw. So, and I think of David. He was, when he was little, like I said, at the mill, I called him Pancho. He went with me whenever he could. When he grew up a little, driving the car, he had an accident down on one of the corners in town with a car. And I asked him how come he didn't stop me. He says, well, I had the right of way. Well, the other guy hit him, and he actually was, David did have the right of way, but I told him the car was more important than the right of way. So that's the last accident he had. And I don't know that he's had many since that I can think of, other than that he did have one with a company car. Dell went with me a lot in some of the trips we went on, and it was always good company to travel with. But after they got in school, I think in David and Dell, they never went on some of our family trips like to Zion Park or around, because they had to play sports. They had to be to practice and all. So they didn't go on the activities we did. So that was something that they missed, and we missed them on. Nancy Nancy was a favorite of my mother in a way, because Nancy was about a year and a half old when my father passed away. No, she wasn't. She wasn't born when my father passed away. But anyway, my mother would tend them a lot, the three girls a lot. And once Nancy was there with Mother alone, and Mother had a heart attack and passed out on the floor. And Nancy was about 4 years old, and she didn't know what to do, so she got the telephone, and the she knew how to get an operator. So she dialed and got an operator, and the operator then talked to her enough to find out where she was, and she had memorized her own phone number. And so the operator called Clara, told her what was happening, and so she got the address and everything from Clara and had an ambulance go and pick Mother up and get her to the hospital, so that Nancy actually saved Mother's life. And so she was a real favorite from Nancy because she loved to have her there with her. So, and Joyce and Carol, when they were little, played in the sand. House in Pico was built in the sandy river bottom type place. And so there was a lot of sand there, and they played in the sand and all. In the backyard, my father had a fish pond, similar to the one Ruth's got here. And so when Carol was tiny and just able to walk, she fell in that pond. And my dad was right there, and he pulled her out. And the next morning I went to his house. There was no fish pond there anymore. He'd filled it full of sand and dirt and planted flowers in it. So he never had a fish pond after that. But Carol and Joyce loved to play there, and they loved to play over in Grandma Reinsch's yard. I got movies of them making mud pies and things over there. So the kids were fun to be around, and we loved them dearly, and still do. Shut it off again.
We're going.
I'll start this morning talking about my contact with Clara. We met in church in Whittier soon after I moved to Southern California, and soon after she moved from Wyoming to California. And her father was a bishop in Green River, Wyoming for years, and they worked for the railroad, and they retired and moved to California. So I met Clara there and dated with her for a few months, and we decided we wanted to get married. This was probably in October, and so we dated for that winter, and she was going to Whittier College, and so was I, so we would get together for lunch at the cafeteria there at the college, and kept real close contact, either on the telephone or I'd go to her home and visit, or she'd come to ours. And so when the college season was over, she worked as an operator of a telephone company, long distance operator. And so she had a job to work at. And she had gone 2 years to BYU and then a year there in Whittier College. And she was a beautiful woman. She was elected queen of the Golden Green Ball. I don't know whether they still have that or not, but at that time that was a big item in the MIA, was the Golden Green Ball. And so she was the queen of the Golden Green Ball.
What was she studying in school?
She took scientific things. She loved chemistry and biology and that type of thing. But we got married anyway, and that eliminated the school for her and for me both. I regretted it since that I didn't struggle to go back, but I used to ride to school with a science teacher who lived in the same neighborhood we did, and he drove every day to school, and I'd often be on the corner catching the bus, and he'd stop and pick me up. And in visiting with him, I found out how much money he made per month. And I worked in the orchard there, and then I did a little side business with bicycles. As we'd go around with the equipment for the orchard, I'd find somebody with a bicycle in their yard, and if they'd sell it, I'd buy it. And I could buy them for $2 or $3, usually, or they'd either give them to me to get them out of their way. And so I was making fairly good money on the bicycle business. My dad would paint them for me, and I'd sell them. So I figured I was making almost as much as he was. And so I figured, well, you know, to go to college and spend that time and money to make what a college professor made didn't make really good sense to me. That's how hard a head I had. I didn't have enough smarts to know that that wasn't the way to go. But anyway, I use that as an excuse for not going back. But I was raising a family in a hurry, and so I didn't have the time and the money to go back. So Carol was born after we got married. Now I'll tell you how we got married. And I may have said this before, but anyway, we went to Salt Lake with my sister Martha and her family and Des, and they let us off in Cokeville, and my brother took us to Salt Lake, and we went to the city center there to get our license, and we had to have a blood test, and we were on foot, so we had to walk from there 8 blocks up to the Salt Lake Clinic to have our blood tested. And then when we got that done, we had to walk back down to get the license. So when we went in to get the license, my father had written a letter giving me permission to be married, and I was only 18 years old. Well, when I got up to the desk there to get our license, my father and I, we hadn't even thought of having it notarized, and they wouldn't accept it unless he was notarized. So there we are, my father in Los Angeles County, and we were in Salt Lake. So I got thinking, my dad had a brother there in Salt Lake in the Gardner Construction Company, and Dad had done a lot of business with him. So I went another 8 blocks back to his office, and we 20th of August, so you know how hot it was in Salt Lake, and I had brand new shoes on. My feet were killing me, but anyway, we walked all those blocks. We got into Uncle Wilford's office and told him our problem. And his accountant, or whatever he was, said, well, I've done enough business with Dell, I know his signature, let me look at it. And so he looked at it and he says, oh, I know that's Dell's signature, I'll notarize it for you. So he did. So that saved our day there. And we walked clear back to that city building and finally got our license. And so we'd walked, I don't know how many blocks, but many miles anyway. And we didn't go into the temple until 5 o'clock. Well, when we got everything through, it was 4:30, so we walked in another 5 blocks back up to the temple. And Newell and Blanche had gotten, while all this was going on, they got us our garments and things we needed. So we stopped in the hotel where we were staying and got that, and then walked up to the temple. And when we went into the temple, they wanted to know where our family was, and we told them we were alone. We didn't have any family with us. So my dad had told me I was scared to death going into the temple. And my dad told me, he says, find an old fellow that looks like he's been going through a lot and tell him you're alone and you're scared, and he'll help you. And so I went to an older fellow there and told him, and he says, I'll get you through, don't worry about it. And he did. And President Joseph Fielding Smith's wife then did the same for Clara. And so they escorted us through. And when we got in the sealing room, we didn't have anybody assigned to marry us, so Joseph Fielding Smith was president then of the temple. And he came in, said he'd marry us, but where was our witnesses? And we said we didn't have any. And he said, well, where's your family? This is a family thing. You have to have your family here. And we told him, he explained why they weren't there. He says, well, I'll go get somebody to come. So he went out, come back with 2 witnesses and 2 or 3 other people just to witness our wedding. And so he married us, and he gave us quite a lengthy talk, which helped us all the rest of our life, really, because of the advice he gave us. So, but he wasn't president of the church then, he was just president of the temple. So we got married then, and we went back, and Newell took us up in the mountains, and we spent a week honeymooning in the mountains all alone, and I've told that before. So we got back to Whittier. She went back to work, and I went to work for my brother-in-law and sister, Marion and Mary. And we worked there. Well, Carol was born in late May, and so we bought a house to get out of that little apartment I talked about, and then I went with my brother Ern up to Orderville to the sawmill that he was buying and worked there. I mentioned that before. So anyway, after that I went to work for myself. And Joyce was born then in Whittier. Nancy was born in Whittier, and Janice was, and Dell and David were, and Lynn. So all of the 5 or 7 of them were born there in Whittier. Gail was born after we moved to Heber City. So as we went along, Clara had to quit working, and so she quit working. She quit working for pay and worked in the home, which was probably 10 times harder than her paying job. But anyway, she raised the kids and did a beautiful job with them. And we had a lot of good times with the kids as they grew up. And we moved to Heber, and Gail was born there. And then that was the end of the family growth anyway. So it was a great time. Claire and I had a good time. She was active in the church all the time, and so was I and the kids. They formed a new stake in Heber in about 1958. And shortly after we moved there, and then she was called as the Relief Society stake, president of the Relief Society in the stake, and served there. She took a group of the stake ward presidents back to the Nauvoo dedication of the women's monuments and things there, and had a great trip out of that. We had a lot of good times together, and I might tell you, Nancy's husband passed away in 1977, and that was a great shock to us all because he was a healthy, big, strong fellow. And they never did find the cause of his death. They just said he had heart failure, which I guess that's what he did. But anyway, we had to do something for her to have a home. So he had some insurance. And so we took the money she had, bought a lot for her, and then built a home. We tried to find one close to us where we lived, but they didn't have one. So we moved up into a new development called Valley Hills. And she bought that a lot and I bought a lot. So they were on different streets, but they backed up so that we were real close there, but not close enough that we had to watch every movement she made. But anyway, we built that house, and she was alone and lonesome, and she met a fellow, and after a couple of years they got married, and then they moved out to Neola, close to Roosevelt. And that marriage did not work out. And so she wanted to move to Mesa, Arizona. And I never was really sure why she did, but she wanted to, and so we packed her up, and I took my pickup and a big trailer, and she pulled a trailer behind her van, and we moved her to Mesa, Arizona. And Clara's sister Bobby and her husband were going on a mission to Spain, and so they let Nancy live in their house while they were gone. And then when they were on the way back, she rented a house and moved into that. And then she lived there a couple of years and met a fellow there and remarried, Bob Walker, who was an excellent I say a young man because he's only about 5 years younger than I am. Or no, he's 10 years younger than I am. Anyway, he's a great fellow, and they've been very happy there. Her kids have all done well. The boys all went on missions, and the girls are married and have children. Well, all of them are married and have children. So that was Nancy's life. Janice, when we were on a trip, was single until she got into her late 30s, and her now husband Mike Price had never been married, and he was about the same age, and they had known each other in high school, but that was all. They didn't know even see each other afterward. But anyway, we got a call while we were on the trip that they decided to get married. So we hurried home and we got them married at Carol's in Salt Lake. And so they lived and built a house in Heber. She had Janice built or had built her own home there in Heber and was doing good in her work and all. But anyway, they sold that house and built a nice big home. And then they decided to move. After we moved, Ruth and I moved here to St. George, they decided they wanted to get out of the cold. And Mike had retired from the Hill Air Force Base, so they moved and bought a home here in Laverton. And they're here now with Jamie, their only child. So that takes care of Janice's life a little bit. And I might go back on when Clara and I were first married. We went to church, and we were trying to save enough money when the baby was decided we were having a baby to buy a crib and a bassinet. And we went along for several months and just didn't save any money. And my elders quorum president was an attorney. And I told him one day, he asked me how things were going, and I told him I was having a terrible time trying to save enough money to buy a crib and a cradle. He says, well, come into my office and we'll figure it out. And he says, bring your budget with you. And I says, what's a budget? I had no budget. So he says, well, come in and we'll work you up one. So I went into his office and he sat down and he had $1 on his table. He had 2 quarters, I think 3 dimes and the rest nickels. Anyway, he laid them out there and I says, now there's your $1. What are you going to do with that $1? And I said, well, the first thing I got to do is pay the rent. Then I got to eat. Then I got to have clothes. And I went through what I was spending my money for. And he says, when he got through, he says, now where did the tithing go and come out of there? I said, I don't have enough money to pay tithing. He said, well, that's where you're wrong. He says, you pay your tithing first, then you put the amount of tithing away in a savings account, and then you live on the rest. And then time comes, you have in that saving account enough to do what you're doing, need to do. So we did that. And lo and behold, when the baby came, we had enough money to buy the crib and the bassinet. And so I have, since that time, always been sold on tithing. I know that when you pay your tithing, you're blessed with it, and your money, they say, well, you pay your tithing and the other 90% will go farther. Well, physically that doesn't make sense, but it does make sense because you will spend your money more thrifty if you pay your tithing than if you don't. And so tithing is a disciplinary thing for me. If I pay my tithing, and I've had experience through my life that at times I didn't pay my tithing, my income went down and everything else went down. As soon as I started paying tithing again, things started to improve. So I'm a complete believer in faith in tithing. So that's a testimony I leave with you on that. Tithing pays to pay it. Okay, let me see. During the growing up years of the kids, we took quite a few vacations, and I think of one right offhand where we had Carol and Joyce, and I had to go up to Brownsville, California to a sawmill, and that's on the west side of the Sierra Nevada mountains, up out of Marysville, California. And when I called on the mill, got my business done there, we decided we'd go over to Lake Tahoe through the back country. And so I got Stanley there at the mill to map me out a road that I could get through over to Lake Tahoe. And I went on back roads that I don't know whether I'd dare go on them today, but we drove back through some of that big timbered forests for hundreds of miles, actually, and it was about as beautiful a drive as I've ever made. But anyway, we got into Lake Tahoe and rented a little cabin right on the beach she'll get it, on the beach of the lake. And so we stayed there 2 or 3 days, and the kids played in the sand and swam in the lake, and we took a boat tour of the lake, which was a beautiful thing. Lake Tahoe is a beautiful spot. So we enjoyed that trip, and then we went the back way, back down to Whittier on the east side of the mountains rather than on the west, which was, to me at that time, a new route. I used it many times after that, but that was the first time I'd ever been down it. So we really enjoyed that. And we used to take lots of trips from Whittier up to Star Valley. I'd come in, and this is something Clara was adept at. I'd come in the evening and say, I've got everything squared away for a week or so. Let's go up to Star Valley. So it's 5 o'clock in the morning we'd leave to go. She'd pack everything, get everything ready, and make the lunches and things we needed, and away we'd go. And the kids then had a station wagon. They could sleep in the back of it. And I'd drive straight through up to Star Valley. And then we'd stay a few days and then turn around and go straight back home again. So we did that quite a number of times. And then after we moved to Hever, that was only a 4-hour drive, so we did that quite often. So we enjoyed those kind of trips. And we always took a picnic lunch with us, and we'd stop somewhere and have lunch, and the kids really enjoyed that. And so did I. I was always ready for food. So we did that. So